Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Established Run's NBA Injury Report Analysis Show. I'm Drew Dinkmeyer alongside Mike Gallagher. We're here to tackle a 5-game slate. Only 5 tonight, Mike? Is that where we're at now?
Yeah, fiver. Yep.
All right, cool. So smaller slate, but with the NBA, that doesn't absolve us from having plenty of injury situations to monitor. So how are you doing tracking down the news today, Mike?
Pretty good. Got all my quotes done for tomorrow for not too crazy slate. I think it's 9 again. But I got all the quotes done for today, so a little bit ahead of the game. None of these wacky 13, 13, 12s. I like the 9, 10s on the Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and no 2-3 game Tuesday, Thursdays.
Yeah, it's we're starting to see the schedule loosen up a little bit from that perspective, where there's more like kind of mid-sized slates. It really gets that way in the middle of December. I was working on our calendar for content over the course of the weekend, and it seems like middle of December we start to get in like consistently like 6 and 7 game slates, and then you get the big build up to Christmas, which Christmas Eve there's no games, and the 23rd there's like 13, 14 games or something like that. So a few more of these, which also means these Tuesday slates, instead of being like 3, are now like 5. So it balances out a little bit more, spreads out the work a little bit. In terms of injury situations tonight, what's on the injury report now, there's not too many like really big ones, but we think there could be more coming because there are some teams playing on the second night of a back-to-back that have yet to release their injury report. But let's start with what we know. We've got LeBron James is questionable on the injury report. He's been questionable for seemingly weeks now on the injury report, but we had him play like a 50-minute overtime game. We had him get banged up a little bit in the Detroit game. So it seems like this questionable might be a little bit more real than some of the past questionables. What are your thoughts on LeBron tonight?
Yeah, to your point, the Lakers have been listing everyone is questionable. Like AD got questionables, LeBron's been questionable and playing through them without any issues. Even before, when he had an injury, he was listed with questionable, and then he got hurt again with the ab. But yeah, he got fumbled and one and was really grabbing in his abdomen area. So we don't really know the specifics of like how it affected him. He says he's going to play. They did list him with the same thing with the rectus abdominis strain. So nothing's changed as far as the actual reporting of it. But you could see he was really laboring through it. Not a back-to-back, so that kind of helps the situation. That would be for sure. But think he plays. But like you said, it's not like the questionable tags have been one of the probably one's most disregard, but this time we want to pay attention to it, especially coming late in the day.
Yeah, and it's a late game, so who knows, when we'll get an update on that. But obviously, we've talked about this before. Anytime you remove one of the big 3 in terms of usage for the Lakers, the other 2 become immediately a little bit more attractive, depending on where their price is settled on things. We also know that Avery Bradley is going to be out for the Lakers tonight, which isn't really that big of a deal. They got Austin Reeves back last game, chose to play Austin Reeves over Dwight Howard in the rotation. Imagine both will be in the rotation tonight, but it should slide Taylor Horton Tucker, I think, into the starting lineup. They could also just go Wayne Ellington and just like keep the floor spacing, because one of the things that they've been trying to do is get more floor spacing when LeBron's on the floor, and then kind of separate Taylor Horton Tucker from LeBron and Russ a little bit, because like having all 3 of them on the floor is a little bit unnecessary and redundant. So I could see Ellington start. I don't think it'll move the minutes around a ton, depending on who starts. I think basically if Ellington starts, he's probably going to play like the 18 to 22 that Bradley was playing. If Taylor Horton Tucker starts, he certainly has a ceiling to get up into the mid-30s. But I think Taylor Horton Tucker is going to be most valuable in games that LeBron or Russ miss, because he's going to be able to pick up more ball handling responsibilities in those situations. So I think if LeBron plays, you're not finding a lot of value on the Lakers tonight. But if LeBron is out, you might see some opportunities.
Yeah, I think you pretty much said it all. You mentioned like Austin Reeves got in there because they wanted to rest Dwight Howard, according to Mike Trudell on the sideline report. But yeah, I think you said most of it. They would probably play both DeAndre and Dwight in kind of either scenario, with or without LeBron, and then up the other guys, as you said, accordingly.
Okay, let's talk about the Knicks, where the big news, I guess that was yesterday, was that Kemba Walker was out of the rotation. And that news came with also, Derrick Rose still listed as questionable on the injury report. RJ Barrett is also listed as questionable, as is Taj Gibson and Nerlens Noel. We currently have Noel and RJ projected in, and Rose and Taj projected out. Really, like, Taj is not going to be in the rotation if Noel is in. So there's a couple different ways that Taj doesn't play in these situations. But RJ and Rose are pretty significant ones. You add in the fact that the news on Kemba not being in the rotation came when both of these guys are a little bit dinged up, and it made me think, like, my first reaction was like, oh, Rose must be healthy enough to play again. But you had quotes from Thibodeau that suggest it's a little bit dicier.
Yeah, he said they were questionable, and they, quote, did a little bit more in practice, which means they didn't go full, is my understanding of it, kind of reading between the lines. So, I mean, yeah, those guys are no spring chickens. They're going to I think they're going to probably all miss. We're just being careful. We try to go 75% sure on that. But I feel like Noel's going to sit based on kind of just reading Tibbs' tone on the whole situation. They could be pretty shorthanded, and Tibbs also had mentioned that he wants to want a tighter rotation as well. So we've seen what a tight Tibbs rotation could look like for the Knicks. And then also, too, he had explained the reasoning of putting Alec Burks in the starting lineup because they wanted more size in their guard unit, and because they don't want to put Kemba in the second unit with all these small guards. So, like, Kemba went from penthouse to outhouse, starting to out of the rotation here. So there could be some, and then obviously RJ, we don't really know. He's ill. It's probably the front end of this illness, not in the back end, because it was added somewhat late to the injury report relative to yesterday. So he might be sitting, and then, man, it could get crazy. We could see a decent amount of Quentin Grimes. The minutes for some of the other guys could really, really get up there.
Yeah, I think this is where some of the commentary is a little bit conflicting to me and makes me think that Tibbs must feel comfortable that Rose is close to being back, because saying that he wants the rotation to be tighter, saying that Kemba is out of the rotation, like, both of those notes make a lot of sense if Rose is back, because then it's pretty straightforward. You have, Burks and Rose at the 1, you slide a few Burks minutes to the 2 that they can play at times together. You have Quickly and Fournier at the 2. You can slide a few minutes from Fournier to the 3 to cover when RJ's not at the 3. You can get a few Grimes minutes if you want, but he doesn't need to in that scenario. Then you have Randall at Toppin at the 4 with, a few small ball 5 minutes, and then Mitch and, Noel or Taj, whoever's left, at the 5. If they're really injured and banged up, I don't know how tight he can keep the rotation in terms of, like, number of bodies, because he has to get into using Grimes, McBride, like, these guys who I don't think they're good enough to earn, like, normal rotation roles. So, I mean, you might see, like, really, really heavy starters minutes in that time. And then the back end guys, like, scattered amongst guys that they're trying. Like, Sims would obviously take the center minutes. We've seen that. But you might see, like, Grimes and Knox and McBride all, like, split based on, like, who's playing well enough. Like, you could see a quick yank. I just don't know that he has enough confidence to let those guys play in a tight rotation. So I think generally the starters here have a lot of minutes upside to them, no matter which scenario this plays out, whether Derek and RJ are available to go or whether they're not. I think there's a ton of minutes upside to the main guys. But I think the number of players in the rotation will be a little bit dependent on how many players they have available, because if he wants to tighten things up and they have their core guys, that makes all the sense in the world to me. If he wants to tighten things up in terms of number of bodies and they don't have their core guys, then I think he must be way more confident in one of these guys than he has shown during the course of the season.
Yeah, I read that kind of just going into the context of everything, thinking back on it. He was talking that whole, like, Titan rotation was talking about, like, kind of, I took it as, like, big picture without Kemba. So I think generally Tibbs has run that pretty straight starting unit, bench unit, 5-man, 10-man rotation really clean. So I read that as when they are healthy, even when they're not, I think they want to go 9. So, like, tonight, maybe they try to still go 9. If one guy can't go, Grimes goes in and go 9.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're projecting right now. But I do think it's going to be kind of 9 at most, maybe 8.5. Highly doubt. I mean, they might go 8 though. If you
and if Rose is out, we saw Burks play 39 minutes last game with Kemba out of the rotation. We saw Quickly get up to 30. So there's, like, a lot of guard minutes available if Derrick Rose is unavailable tonight, which is the way we're currently projecting it. That is the first game on the slate, right? That's a 7:30 Eastern game, national TV game, battle for New York between Brooklyn Knicks. So I assume we will have that information well in advance of lock and be able to adjust things off of that. But just know that it's going to be hard to project all the upside from a median perspective on how high the Knicks rotation could get tonight, just because they haven't been as concentrated as like old school Tibbs teams in the past in terms of getting multiple guys up into the 35 plus range. But he's making comments that suggest that they could get there. They removed Kemba Walker from the rotation, which gives them an out to do so. It's hard to project based on what we've seen this year, but there's certainly routes to that being the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you mentioned the Grimes quote could be in the rotation too. So like that's kind of the way we've been kind of breaking it down.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to some of the smaller question marks on the slate. Toronto, they already are without OG Anunoby, Kem Birch. Chris Boucher didn't even make the rotation last game in this scenario. So, I mean, we're talking like talk about tight rotations and old school Tibbs. I mean, Nick Nurse is doing it. Gary Trent is questionable on the injury report. What do you think his likelihood of playing tonight is?
It sounds like he's not going to play based on what they've been saying. Got the calf issue. That's generally a week out of there. So probably be pretty shorthanded again. Yeah, I mean, look at this rotation, man. They started Speed, played 38 minutes, was asked about Fred VanVleet playing 40 minutes in this game over the weekend against the Celtics. And he said it was just a little bit too much, and he'll, quote, probably be 37, 38 is where he's going to be most nights. He wrecked Memphis in the last game. They ran pick and roll like 10 straight times, I want to say. It's a guess, but that was interesting. The Boucher quotes, man, I mean, he laid into him. He said that Boucher has to, quote, handle it like a pro being out of the rotation, and says that he wanted hardworking guys and like he'd rather have Yuta. Like he chose to play Yuta Watanabe against Cantor because he thought that he was a better force again. Like that's insane. It's what a doghouse he's in right now. They got Isak Bonka because he's playing hard. Scottie Barnes also got a quick hook, and Nurse has been kind of doing that from time to time where like Barnes will make a mistake, get pulled out, talk to him, put him back in. So minutes are really, really high. This team's not in a back-to-back. They play Sunday and then Thursday on the bookends of this game. But yeah, we should see a pretty similar rotation, I would imagine. No Kem Birch against, big old Steven Adams. They might go a little bit more Yuta because they didn't really like Precious against some of those bigger dudes.
Yeah, we have Trent projected in currently, but obviously things change dramatically if Trent is out. It's just a situation where you got to feel really confident to project that from the get-go because the values obviously change. You get Svi into the mid-30s, you get Achua with a chance to get into the mid-30s, and man, like immediately you start getting like flooded with Toronto guys. So there's a path that we're heading in that direction tonight. I think Memphis, first game without Ja was against the Sacramento team coming off the triple overtime win against the Lakers that put forth really poor effort out there. I think it masks how much of a struggle it's going to be for Memphis without Ja. So this is a decent spot for the Raptors, especially if they are without Gary Trent and they are playing really, really tight tonight. But just be aware, like guys like Boucher, that the coach does not like, which we've been stressing on all our shows for the last 6 months that, Boucher is just not liked by Nick Nurse. They can get the rug pulled out from them pretty quickly. In this
just some context to the Trent stuff. It's a, quote, deep, painful bruise, according to, I think it was Nurse who said that. And Nurse said he didn't have a timetable to return either. So it's a bruise, though. So it's like a little bit tricky. But I feel like he's right on the brink of cracking that 75% threshold.
And some notes I'd also have for this game is just like, in general, I think the Raptors are going to be more invested in trying to play this game a little bit smaller, which does make Steven Adams' minutes a little bit riskier and potentially a little bit higher upside for Jaren Jackson if he gets to take a bigger pie of the center minutes. Just something to kind of keep in mind there as we roll through. On Memphis' side of the equation, you've got Zaire Williams as questionable. I do think without Ja Morant, like, they are going to, we've talked about how Memphis almost always uses like 10 plus man rotations. This last game against Sacramento, obviously, is a total disaster because the game was so out of hand that you saw the minutes come way down on the starters and get deep into the bench. But Zaire's been playing like 16, 17 minutes. If he was unable to go, you start to allocate those around. And you probably have to find another body to get in the rotation in that scenario. So who do you think that extra body that would get into the rotation would be if Zaire is unable to go?
I think it'd be Brandon Clark, actually. It seemed that they just kind of go a little bit bigger that way. It just seemed that based on the comments from Taylor Jenkins, he really liked Brandon Clark to maybe get more minutes. So maybe they run him as with Conchar, Melton.
Yeah, we have Clark in the
Anderson.
rotation now.
Yeah, I'm saying a little bit more though. Like I think it's a little bit more secure. So I think they could still go.
But do you think they'd go 9, or do you think they'd add somebody in as a 10?
I probably think they'd stick to 9 and boost those guys.
Okay.
At least we saw them go without
Tillman as a 10th. I think he would be the most likely in that scenario. But yeah, it's obviously it's different when they're down Ja already in terms of the depth of player pool that they're going to go into.
Yeah, I think they're without Ja, they have to kind of. I mean, that's a pretty big. I feel like we always talk about like them having 10, 11 guys, but they don't have Grayson Allen this year. I feel like their depth isn't quite as strong, especially if we take Zaire out of it. So I think it'd just be cleaner just to play 9 with that second unit of Clark, Slow-Mo, Conchar, Melton, and then Zaire's out.
Yeah,
I think that makes more sense.
Okay, let's move over to Detroit.
Should add just quickly, if I could add quickly that Desmond Bain handled the second unit point guard duties and was a good second unit ball handler against Taylor Jenkins too. So something to watch after this game was kind of blown out and he was chucking more than passing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how his role continues to develop. They've got an offense that's very kind of disjointed without Ja because it's so dependent on Ja. So they'll run some pick and roll stuff with Tyus and Jaren, but they ended up doing a ton of isolation stuff last game.
Yeah.
Both Jaren and Dylan Brooks had a ton of isolation possessions, and long term, I do not think that is a winning solution or an efficient offensive solution. But it did work that night against the Kings, who were really lackluster in their effort. All right, let's move to Detroit, where Frank Jackson is questionable, and usually, a player like Frank Jackson is not somebody you really think of in terms of like moving or impacting the slate. He's a guy that, generally off the bench just kind of shoots some threes. His minutes variance has been high, but he shot the ball well this year, so he's earned more playing time. But I kind of think because he shot the ball so well this year and he has earned that more playing time, we've got him up around like 25 minutes projected now, that if he were to miss this game, it's kind of a big deal. He's been questionable on the injury report for the last 3 or 4 games, has played through all of them. But you can see, in the last game against the Lakers, he got up to 28 minutes. And I think they're really valuing kind of the shooting that he provides when they're playing often with, Cade and Killian, Cade or Killian on the floor, who have more of the ball handling responsibilities and need a little bit more floor spacing alongside them.
Yeah, it would definitely be a Josh Jackson situation. He only has a tibia bruise, so basically got kicked in the leg, I would imagine. So he's probably got a good chance to play. But yeah, Josh Jackson would pick up most of that run. Certainly a bit more upside to your Killian Hayes, Corey Josephs, and they do play those guys together a little bit. So that's something to keep an eye on. Hamidou Diallo would have more secure minutes floor as well, and against a pretty good matchup against the Blazers.
Yeah, I don't think we'd see Saben Lee. I think you'd see those minutes distributed amongst Joseph, Jackson, Diallo. But I do think for Killian Hayes, a guy who has had his minutes stuck in the 18 to 19 range on different nights, and then got up to 28 in this game, or 28, 29 against the Lakers. He's been on these paces and then he loses playing time at times in the fourth quarter to Frank Jackson. I think that would be less likely to happen to Josh Jackson or Diallo or different situations like that. So I think his minutes floor and ceiling would improve a little bit for Killian Hayes out there.
I think they would need him too against what I think is Dame. Talk about that in a little bit. And then Cedar Mccoll, a very perimeter-oriented scoring team. They really like his defense more than his offense. So I think that his minutes are pretty safe.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Sacramento, where Harry Barnes is doubtful, Harrison Barnes, and then Mo Harkless is listed as questionable. They will get Rashawn Holmes back tonight, which is a big boost. The minutes for Sacramento projecting them are just a mess in that front court when Alex Len is out, and it's been particularly tough with Harrison Barnes out as well. You saw, this game against Memphis. My God, Alex Len played. I think he had 3 rotations to get his 7 minutes. 3 rotations of a minute and a half to 2.5 minutes each time. It was incredibly gross. Tristan Thompson got up there a little bit. Damian Jones played because of the blowout and whatnot. I think.
Great! Mitchell Robinson just got put on as questionable for an illness. That's great.
So we could see some really weird stuff with the Knicks.
Sim City.
We could see some really, really, really weird stuff with them tonight. Okay, on this front with the Kings, sticking to them for a second.
Sorry.
The rotations, I think, like Fox and Halliburton are pretty solid with they're going to play in terms of what competitive game environments look like. They're going to get into the mid to low 30s. I think Buddy Hield in these situations where Harkless and Barnes are out has that same type of range as well. And I think Davion Mitchell can get into the mid 20s in those types of environments as well. In terms of filling the power forward minutes, it's been, they've been giving Marvin Bagley a little bit more of a shot of late, but he's still been behind Metu. And his usage this year has been way, way down. Bagley's not really, his usage is like 15%. His career like 23, 24%. So I don't think even if Harkless sits, there's a ton of value in the front court to really extract from Sacramento. I think you could maybe speculate in large field stuff with Metu or Bagley, but I really don't think there's a ton there. I think most of the increased value actually comes from the backcourt, where I think Buddy Hield's minutes get more secure.
Yeah, and so just to explain some of these minutes, it was a full-on line change because they were getting wrecked early in the third quarter and before that. So they ran out that second unit of Louis King, Damian Jones, Davion Mitchell, Marvin Bagley, and Buddy Hield, like straight subbed everybody out, and basically never put him back in, with the exception of, I think, Metu, Terrence Davis, and I think Fox got a little bit. But can't read too much into it. But Gentry was not happy. He says his guys kind of weren't playing to the level they should, and guys who, if they don't want to play their hardest, he's going to pull them. So certainly having Rashawn Holmes takes Alex Len out of the mix. I wouldn't be surprised if Alex Len goes from penthouse to outhouse here. And maybe they play a little bit of Metu. They haven't really played Metu at the 5 too much yet, so it's kind of something to watch. But again, with the Holmes back, you're not really looking at any.
I don't even think they could do that too much, because if you're without Harkless and Barnes, I think you need Metu minutes to be filled at the 4. So I think Metu and Bagley would handle the 4 almost exclusively in that spot. And then I think, you'd have the 4 guards, I guess 5 guards with Terrence Davis, Halliburton, Hield, Fox, and Mitchell to soak up the 3 minutes of the 1 through 3 spots would be my guess. Mm-hmm. They started Terrence Davis last time in this situation. I think they'd still stick with that, but I don't know. I mean, they were so bad with the first unit. I think they could go right to Buddy. I just think they like having Buddy off the bench to split up Halliburton, Fox, and Buddy a little bit from a usage perspective.
Yeah, interesting matchup against possibly LeBron too. So I mean, do you put Terrence Davis on him? Like that spells kind of trouble.
Yeah, it's not a good spot for some of these smaller Kings lineups, given the size disparities between some of the lineups the Lakers will run out there, which will be very, very big. I would expect the Kings to be launching away from 3 tonight, like lots of 3-point attempts would be my guess. Okay, let's talk about Portland, because we have not seen an injury report from them, but you have some concerns about Damian Lillard's availability tonight.
Yeah, a little worried about Dame back-to-back. Chauncey Billups sounded kind of not upset, but just, I guess, frustrated with Dame not being healthy. So, against the Pistons, it is at home. I think he's got a chance to play, but I wouldn't be surprised if he pops up on the injury report at all. So obviously, Anthony Simons was really good last night. It was really the only bright spot. Billups said that he used his aggression and was good for them. And then also we saw the Norm Powell, who just has a thigh bruise, so that's not something that's usually more than a day-to-day thing. And maybe the back-to-back was a factor. And interestingly, Billups said that we saw Nazir Little start the third quarter. He said that was a mistake because the opening play that he drew up for them had Nazir Little's initials instead of Tony Snell. So the player's like, okay, I'm clearly starting. So he's like saying like, oh, I looked up like, oh, why is he starting? And then he realized he made a mistake. So good job, Chauncey.
Yeah.
But so obviously if Dame's limited, like Cedar Mccoll, huge smash. Certainly we'd expect Simons to start. DSJ would get in the rotation. Again, this is kind of all very, very speculative on my part, and it could be nothing, but that's what the injury shows for.
And we'll see if we get an injury report there. Obviously, it's a very favorable matchup against Detroit, so it's a softer spot. It's a home game. They're almost 10-point favorites. It might be a spot to get Dame some rest if they're looking for it. But given how poorly they played last night, given how poorly they've played on the road in general, I wouldn't be surprised if Dame gutted through something and they just kind of managed his minutes a little bit more. Instead of getting up to the 36, 37, 38, they keep him around 33, 34, something like that. And that seems like a potential outcome to me. But we'll see when we get more information on the injury report. I also think the health of Norm Powell has an impact on all this stuff. Like if Norm Powell is able to go, I think there's more outs to Dame being managed a little bit or rested, because I think they'd feel a little bit more confident in the scoring punch that they have. You could also see if Dame was rested, you could also see scenarios where they play Nurk more than they have. Like Nurk got up to 27 last night, has been playing really well of late, but the minutes have still been kind of limited down. They would need his scoring without Dame. So I think there's definitely different ways that if they didn't have Dame, you could see different Portland rotations than we've seen recently.
Yeah, I would add, though, that Billups has expressed a couple separate times that Nurk does kind of wear down in back-to-backs. His minutes are down in zero-rest games at 23 and change. And he's 24 plus, 25 on 2 days rest on all of those. But, I think they'd have to feed him for sure. And, pretty good. So-so matchup. He'd have a ton of size on Isaiah Stewart.
Yeah, they've had what, 2 back-to-backs this year or 3? Like it's a small number.
I think more. They had one. I was just looking. They had the one where Dame sat the back-to-back. They've had one since then, and he did play in both ends of those. So I think they had one end before that. Oh, so Nurk. I think it was 3 or 4 game sample.
Just looking at Nurk in terms of back-to-backs, 23 and 22 on the 5th and the 6th. 21 and 18, but the first game was a blowout in the 18 against Toronto, a team that like loves to play small. So I think that factored into it. Then 24 and 32 against the Kings, 32 on the back end of the back-to-back, a night that he was playing really, really well. So I think I know Billups has talked about that, but I think it's a little bit more matchup dependent and like how he's going on the whole.
Yeah, and a necessity factor for sure. If Dame doesn't play, they almost have to play him more unless CJ's really cooking.
Yeah. Okay. So let's circle back to Mitch Robinson now, who's been added to questionable on the injury report, and think through the Knicks situation. I think this one is layered now when you talk about having RJ Barrett and Derrick Rose on the injury report as well. But I think if Mitch were to sit generally, I think the Knicks would have 2 options. If they have Derrick Rose, I think they might start Julius Randle at the 5, honestly. If they don't have Derrick Rose, I don't think they have enough bodies to feel comfortable doing that. But they could. They could just slide Top into the 4, but I really don't think they want to do that. So how do you think they just plug Jericho Sims right in and be the guy?
Man, I don't think so. I think they kind of have to start Julius.
I think they'd keep Sims as the backup 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a tough ask. Tibbs talked him up in the last presser just a little bit, but man, I don't know. I feel like they'd have to start small. I don't think you want a guy like that against the Brooklyn offense. You kind of get
the challenge, obviously, about starting small. Then, though, is like they don't have a lot of good options to defend Kevin Durant. And so, how do you go about doing that in that scenario? This is where they miss Reggie Bullock a little bit, but they don't have kind of that size and that length to do it. So, who do you think draws the Durant assignment tonight?
Probably Barrett, right?
Yeah.
If assuming he goes, this is pretty ugly right now. Do we just bet Brooklyn to cover this game at this point? This seems like it's going so bad.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it's a competitive game because we've got a Randall prop out there already that we kind of needed to be. Right. But yeah, I think this could be a spot where if they have Derrick Rose, I could see them starting Burks, Fournier, Barrett, Randall, and then quickly. Or Rose, probably quickly, honestly, in that scenario, because I think they'd still want to keep Derrick's minutes a little bit managed. And then they could go in the second unit with Rose, Sims, Toppin, Grimes, and one of the first unit guys staggered in.
Galaxy Brain, maybe you just start Knox, just fill minutes that way.
That's another thing that they could do would be.
This is how desperate they are. They're just running out of bodies.
Yeah.
And I think I'd rather have a guy who you wouldn't normally have in the rotation. You have to put him in. I think it makes sense just to put him with the first unit, kind of a la Dwayne Casey.
Yeah, I think the other thing there is when you think about role replacement as well, look, they're not going to have great options to replace Mitch's rebounding from that first unit. But defensively, if they can keep Randall off KD, put Knox on KD in that type of spot as a sacrificial lamb, and then have the floor spacing on the offensive side, to let Randall kind of create offensively. You get into a situation where you're going to just try to outscore Brooklyn, which will be challenging, but I think that could be a route that they go here. Obviously, all of this changes if they get just one of Nerlens, Taj, or Mitch available. Because if one of those guys is available, they're starting. I think the only scenario we're getting Randall starting at the 5 is if all 3 are unavailable tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree. And Portland did not file on the 2:30 just now.
Okay.
That's worth.
Well, we will continue to keep an eye on Portland for the rest of the day to see if we get any information there. For those of you that are subscribers to Establish Runs premium content on the NBA side, we will be back at 5:30 Eastern with Mike and Andrew Wiggins on the premium show today. I will be doing a little Christmas tree trimming and decorating at a friend's place and then playing some tennis tonight. So smelling the roses for myself on this 5-game slate. For those of you that are not behind the paywall, happy holidays to you. I don't know what you're doing, but have great holidays. You could have better holidays if you were behind the paywall. But have a great holiday. We'll see you guys tomorrow, 2:00 Eastern for the big 9-game slate, breaking down the injuries with myself and Mike once again. Best of luck in all your games tonight, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.